with the humanitarian crisis still unfolding at the southern border and new disturbing images of overcrowded and squalid conditions at migrant detention facilities. What appears to be a presidential priority heading into this holiday weekend is a 4th of July celebration. Tanks already in position now on the streets of the nation's capital in advance of military-style events tomorrow and a speech during the evening's festivities at the Lincoln Memorial that's beginning to look a lot more like a MAGA rally, especially given the news today that the Republican Party is handing out VIP tickets to big donors and political appointees that will put them front and center when the president takes the stage, and considering the president's pattern at events that are traditionally apolitical. Take, for example, when he bragged about the size of his inauguration crowd in front of that memorial wall of stars at the CIA. That was immediately after he took office. More recently, he criticized Nancy Pelosi, remember this, in front of the American Cemetery in Normandy. And he also turned a Boy Scout jamboree into a political event. So it is no surprise that there's growing concern President Trump might politicize this 4th of July event as well. And today, open questions about who is footing the bill for what could turn out to be little more than a campaign-like stop. The Washington Post is reporting that, for starters, the Park Service is diverting $2.5 million intended to improve national parks to cover some of the costs. But the Post adds, quote, the diverted park fees represent just a fraction of the extra costs the government faces as a result of the event. And Trump administration officials, they write, have consistently refused to say how much taxpayers will have to pay. That reporting appears to have the president on the defensive today. He tweeted, quote, the cost of our great salute to America tomorrow will be very little compared to what it is worth. We own the planes. We have the pilots. The airport is right next door, Andrews. All we need is the fuel. We own the tanks, and all fireworks are donated by two of the greats. Nice! Exclamation point. Here to help me break it all down today, from the Washington Post, we have national political reporter Robert Costa. On set, NBC News correspondent Heidi Przybyla, New York Times political reporter Ken Vogel, plus Doug Thornell, former DNC senior advisor, and chief national correspondent for the New York Times, Mark Leibovich. Thanks, all of you, for being with us. Robert, we're going to have you join us here as well. Heidi, I want to start with you. Talk about what particularly makes this so abnormal for a president to put himself in the middle of a 4th of July celebration with Air Force One, F-35s, Marine One, all flying overhead. Because it's a celebration of our nation's history. It's not a celebration of any particular individual, including him. We just have not had this in modern times. Actually, I was going back and looking. You kind of have to go back to previous centuries to find a parallel example of something like this happening. Now, if he wanted to just give a very special celebration to the American people, he could still do the pyrotechnics. He could still do the jet flyovers and maybe even the tanks, but he's putting himself at the center of this. He is, by all accounts, the most polarizing president in modern history, and simply by his presence, standing in front of one of our most cherished monuments, makes this a very controversial decision. Mark, your gut when you hear about this?
Well, look, I mean, it is unprecedented. It's very Trump. It's very on brand, if you want to sort of look at it that way. I mean, the idea that this can still be a non-political event, that we can just come out and celebrate the 4th of July is, I think, far-fetched, because at this point, anyone who goes is essentially seen as making a political decision and a political choice. And look, I mean, it's pretty obvious that this is a pretty political event, and I think the polarization of Donald Trump has collided very much with, as you mentioned, as you laid out, a lot of previously non-political events. Yeah, they promise. You talk to White House officials, they say, thematically, this is going to be about the greatness of America. And then Kellyanne Conway told us yesterday, and all the successes we have had as an administration on job creation and helping veterans. Let me read for you what Greg Sargent from the Washington Post writes. He writes the following. He says, by politicizing the 4th of July so nakedly, Trump has inevitably transformed the celebration into a campaign event. It remains to be seen, he writes, whether he will do so explicitly in his speech, but either way, that conversion has already been implicitly accomplished. The naked audacity of the usurpation is itself the point. That's a $5 word for you. That Democrats and liberals are getting trolled into expressions of outrage over it only reinforces that point to greater effect. Ken, does it matter what he says tomorrow when he's up on the podium? What if he surprised all of us and just said, I'm here, Democrats, Republicans, we stand together and celebrate this day?
Would anything change? Is that possible he would do so?
That would be truly shocking. I think we've seen a number of instances where the spotlight has been on Trump, and there's been a lot of attention on the specific words that he's using, whether he's going to live up to the moment or lapse into his sort of more ad-lib campaign-style rhetoric. And, you know, they could put him on the teleprompter, and he could come out and give a soaring speech about American ideals and independence and the like. But I think Democrats, Republicans, everyone is going to be waiting for him to launch into, as Kellyanne Conway put it, a recitation of their greatest hits, which ultimately tends to lead, no matter how scripted, they try to have him into campaign-style rally speak.
To be clear, already this is having an impact, Doug. Right now, if tourists want to go see the Lincoln Memorial today, they can no longer do it. It's effectively been shut down, or at least was for a period of time today, because they're setting up the stage for the president there. Airspace is going to be shut down at Reagan, not because the president is speaking per se, but because the president is speaking there. They have moved the fireworks, which means for more than an hour, people aren't going to be able to fly in and out of town. The RNC, we heard from the RNC, the campaign has spoken out about this. Here's what the campaign said. They said, as a courtesy, the campaign, the Trump campaign, also got tickets, was provided tickets for staff and their families and friends, much like for the Easter egg roll or White House garden tours, probably similar to how Congress provides tickets to their events on the west front of the Capitol. I reached out to the DNC. They haven't received any tickets. So
and the Lincoln Memorial isn't the White House, so I get why you would give tickets at a White House event to your friends and supporters. I grew up in D.C. I've been living here for my whole life. I remember 4th of July celebrations. There's no need for this. I mean, we've celebrated America on 4th of July pretty well. I think, in part, this is about a president who's deeply insecure. And this is a bit of sort of phony toughness that we've seen out of him. Parading the tanks, the fighter jets. I think all of this is about him trying to, sort of push out this machismo about his presidency that, really is a big problem for him in terms of his insecurity about his toughness. We see when he is actually face-to-face with people like Kim Jong-un and Putin, he backs down. And this is really, I think, about him, like, propping himself up and propping up his toughness.
Robert, let me bring you in here if I can, because it's your paper that's reporting something as it relates to the cost of all this. A lot of people are wondering what it will cost. The Washington Post reporting nearly $2.5 million of money that would basically be spent to help improve the nation's parks, instead is being diverted for this extravaganza. In the big scheme of things, $2.5 million is not a ton of money. It is only a fraction of how much this is going to cost right now. What is the thinking behind the scenes at the White House about the way this is all going to go over?
The president has explained this away on Twitter as just a minor cost, and it's only part of the cost that the Post has reported, $2.5 million in National Park Service fees being diverted for this July 4th celebration and presidential event on the Mall. It is not clear yet about how much the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, is spending on all of its military aircraft and the troops that are coming and the transportation of these 2 tanks onto the National Mall. Those costs have not yet been revealed. Congress, of course, will be pressing for those on those questions in the coming weeks.
Ken, we saw the president's tweet, the president defensive on Twitter, basically saying, hey, this is actually costing far less than what it is worth to America. We've got the gas, the pilots, the planes. That ignores a ton of other costs, right? Like security. We heard from Mayor Muriel Bowser earlier today saying, hey, this is going to cost Washington, D.C. a ton of money to help secure this entire event. You're moving the president over to the mall.
And I think that's where you'll see the attention after the fact. If this lapses into a campaign-style event, you're going to see calls for the president's campaign to reimburse some of these costs. We see that with rallies. The president's campaign has notably not reimbursed local police departments for overtime costs that they accrued. And D.C. still claims that he owes costs for other events that have been there. So I think that's going to be yet another sort of lingering effect of this, not to mention the potential damage to the streets that we hear folks in D.C. complaining about.
There's definitely something to Doug's point about Trump long having this desire to choreograph some event around him being the dear leader. But what is
just days after meeting with dear leader.
So what is so unusual about this and different from previous instances of this is that this is why the word hijacked is being used, because the American people are being co-opted into this. This is their day. This is the day for America and for every American. And yet the American people are being somewhat against their will, some of them who are just coming there for the fireworks, co-opted to be a part of this. And then the second thing is the tanks. This is just not something that we see in most Western countries. This is more evokes
Soviet
images
Union,
of Iran,
China,
the Soviets, China,
Although,
North
to
Korea.
be fair, he apparently became enamored with this idea after going to
There's
France.
an exception.
After
There's the
Bastille
exception.
Day.
And I got a feeling that he's going to be pretty disappointed with these two lone tanks as compared to the spectacle,
along the
massive
side of the road.
spectacle, that we saw in France on Bastille Day when he was treated by Emmanuel Macron to a front row seat in the reviewing stand.
Mark, I want to get you in on this, but this is from Michael McFaul. Of course, he's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, who said, "This reminds me," referring to the picture of these tanks, "this reminds me of parades I used to attend in the Soviet Union. Not the right look for the 4th. Again, this is coming after the president met with Kim Jong-un, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, of course, who he hasn't called out, the leader of Saudi Arabia, even after the death of a Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi, and also with Vladimir Putin, where they laughed about fake news, even though Vladimir Putin's overseen the deaths of at least 25 journalists.
Yeah, and there are some devastating juxtaposition photos of what it's like in North Korea, what it's like in Russia, what it could look like here. I mean, I think the key word you mentioned earlier, and it was actually Greg Sargent in the Post who mentioned, is trolling. I mean, the president loves to be in people's heads. No one more so than the media's heads, his critics' heads. He loves to annoy people on the other side. Look, we're talking about this. He probably would love that. And it is, I think at this point, for no matter what you think about it, it is a spectacle, and I think everyone will have some curiosity about how the thing will go. Will it be a fiasco?
How many people will
Waiting for
turn
the crowd-sized tweets.
Yeah.
Dueling.
Well, he's calling it, go ahead, Doug.
I was just
going
going to say, but Ken brought up a good point. You know, I think that if this goes off the rails and does become a MAGA event, a political speech, where he spends most of the time going after Democrats for being socialists, I think that really does backfire. I think the event in general will backfire, but if that's where he goes, I think it's actually a missed opportunity for the president. He could surprise us. I don't think he will, but I think he's going to go after Dems implicitly or explicitly on his campaign attack against socialism.
Robert, let me bring you back in here if I can really quickly. One of the concerns that we've seen reporting on is the president. There are concerns that they may not have the giant crowds. You remember another time that the president spoke when he was out on the Mall? That was his inauguration day. The president said he had the biggest crowds, far bigger than Barack Obama. That was obviously fact-checked, as evidenced by the pictures on your screen. That's his crowd on the bottom, President Obama on the top. Are there concerns within the White House? By the way, 50% chance of thunderstorms tomorrow at about this time.
Trump allies tell me today that they are concerned inside of the White House and around the president's inner circle that because of traffic concerns and crowd concerns, many locals who may support the president in the Washington area, Virginia, Maryland, are going to stay away from downtown Washington on July 4th, and that the crowd itself will be mostly there for the fireworks, and so they're going to have a built-in crowd for that event that is regular on July 4th and for the Capitol 4 celebration down by the Capitol with musical events. But the president, if you look at the stage setting, it could be a pretty contained event, the way they're setting it up around the Lincoln Memorial. And that could, my sources tell me, could be a response to the way they're not really sure how the crowd's going to congregate due to weather and due to other concerns.
Heidi, it seemed like an easy way they could have done this would have been to say, hey, we're going to fly planes over. The F-35 is going to come. We're going to fly Marine One. Everyone's going to get a good show. Even, Air Force One's going to go by. And I'll stay at the White House, have my political friends over. We'll have a good party. You all enjoy a good show, and I'll get credit because I came up with this idea.
And
that's
you
not
would
the way he
have
works.
gotten the normal, traditional D.C. suburban crowd that would have come down there. But look, I talked to Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton earlier today, and I said, so what are you expecting? Who's coming to this? And she said, I think that most of the locals, the people who usually come to this, are all going to populate and congregate down on the Capitol side of the mall, and that he will have his coordinate. Yeah, well, and for the band, and that he will have his crowd there with the VIP tickets. And she thought that maybe he had to do that almost, even because of the unpredictability around who's going to come there. This is D.C. proper is a very Democratic area.
Is that what's going to happen?
Look, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, that again, it makes it interesting, I guess, on some levels. I mean, I think the notion that this was just another day that we couldn't maybe think we could put politics aside, whether it was a sports team going to the White House after they won a championship or a holiday party or something.
This was sort of the last one on that list.
I don't know
right?
if it was the last one. I mean, there's always
What else
new,
is there? We'll find them. There's plenty to come.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, the Easter egg. Well, I guess the Easter egg thing is
already political.
I mean, I wasn't there this year, but anyway, yeah. Look, it's a spectacle. Donald Trump loves spectacles. We'll see.
It's going
It's
to be
a colossal waste of money.
We'll be waiting. We'll find out what happens. Obviously, we'll wait to see what the president says there. Robert Costa, thank you for your reporting and spending some time with us. Still ahead right here.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.